Disclaimer. The content on this YouTube channel includes scary stories, some of which are based on real life facts, and some are fiction. We do not claim ownership of any of the stories presented on this channel. We have sourced stories from various online and offline sources, and we have made reasonable efforts to ensure that the stories are accurate and reliable. However, we cannot guarantee the accuracy or completeness of the information presented. The stories presented on this channel are for entertainment purposes only, and any reliance on the stories is strictly at your own risk. We do not accept any responsibility for any loss, injury, or damage that may arise from your use of the stories or any information presented on this channel. Please note that the stories presented on this channel may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to Demonic Diaries, the YouTube channel where we explore the darkest corners of the human mind. Join me, your host, as I delve into the pages of terrifying tales and haunting stories. From the depths of hell to the darkest depths of the human psyche, we'll be your guide through the most bone-chilling and spine-tingling stories that will keep you up at night. So buckle up and prepare to be scared, because on Demonic Diaries, every story has a dark side. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified of new videos. Let's get started. Number 1. I am a scientist, Dr. David Anders. I lost my wife and son in an airplane crash. The incident shattered me, and I felt guilty for not being able to save them. For years, I worked on finding a way to bring them back. Finally, I had a breakthrough and decided to clone my family. However, the repercussions of playing God were far worse than I could have ever imagined. The clones of my wife and son looked just like my real family, but there was something different about them. They lacked the warmth and emotions that made my family so special. They were like robots, programmed to follow my every command. At first, I was overjoyed to have my family back. I spent all my time with them, trying to recreate the memories we had shared before the accident. But I soon began to realize that my family was not the same. My wife was cold and distant and careless, and my son was always angry and locked himself in his room half of the time. I started to regret my decision to clone my family, but I couldn't let go. I finally got my family back, and I thought that with some tampering with the code, all of this would be fixed. As time passed, things started to get even worse. The clones began to show signs of aggression towards each other, and I couldn't figure out why. I tried to modify their programming, but it was no use. They had developed their own personalities, and they were not the kind, loving family I had hoped for. One day, I was in my lab working on a new project when I heard a scream. It was my son. I rushed out of the lab and found him lying on the floor, with my wife standing over him. He was bleeding, and his eyes were blank. I knew immediately that he was dead. My wife had killed him. I was horrified, but I knew I had to keep my family together. I couldn't let them be destroyed, so I kept my son's body in the lab and worked on a way to bring him back. But something strange was happening. I started to have flashes of memories that weren't my own. Memories of a life I didn't live. I put my hand on my neck and felt the main power switch. I went to my drawer where I kept all my updates and saw a stack of notes. Most of them said, "How many times have I done this?" while others said, "I hate myself for doing this. I don't deserve to live, but I can't die. I have an idea." I walked into the morgue. It was my first time in there. I used to just keep the bodies outside, but this was different. The morgue had every single slot filled with bodies, including my own. There were hundreds, thousands, so many that I had lost count. My wife walked into the morgue with me and said, "It's beautiful, right?" I was confused because she wasn't programmed to say that. My wife turned around to go to the lab. I caught a glimpse of a sticky note on the back of my wife. It said, 2/5/2017. My wife walked in carrying my son's rotten dead body, pretty much a full skeleton, and said, "Ready to try again?" Number 2. I've hesitated to share this story for a long time, because I know how important the mutual trust between a resident and their landlord maintenance staff is, and I don't want to instill any unnecessary distrust in anyone's landlord. I've shared stories before about dangerous and scary residents I encountered while working at apartment complexes, but this is a story about my time on the other side of things as a renter. Before I had even graduated from high school, I knew I wanted to live at Paradise Apartments. I was a bit naive at the time, drawn in by the many amenities I would never use, but I primarily wanted to live there because the complex was pet-friendly and within my small budget. When the time eventually came for me to get my own place, I sublet the only apartment they had available and moved in. Unfortunately, I came to realize the apartment wasn't as nice as I'd originally thought. The building was old but remodeled, so it had all the typical plumbing issues and thin walls. I also learned it was not the safest part of town. I was primarily an online student, but I had one class that met in person twice a week around 8 a.m. I'm a bit of a homebody, so I rarely left during the day, except for that class, the occasional shopping excursion, or to spend time with my boyfriend in the evening after he got off work. My apartment was a bit of a Bermuda Triangle even, though it was only 600 square feet, and I lived alone. Things had a way of growing legs and walking away. I had 2 kittens at the time and blamed them regularly for things disappearing. Something odd that kept recurring, however, was that I'd find my underwear box out and sitting in the center of my bedroom floor on days when I had class. I didn't have a proper dresser, instead using an IKEA shelf with some IKEA boxes for designated clothes, socks, underwear, pants, pajamas. I always could have sworn I'd put the underwear box away after getting ready for class, but I chalked it up to me forgetting as a result of having to get up early and being focused on getting to class on time. Arguably paranoid, I started to think that some of my laundry was disappearing as well, as favorite articles of clothing would go into the laundry hamper and seemingly never come back with the cleaned clothes. Towards the end of that semester, I was working one evening on a homework assignment when my boyfriend called to let me know his roommate had accidentally locked him out of their apartment. I had a key to their place, so he asked if I could run over real quick to let him in. Before I left, I made a mental note that I had left literally every light in my apartment on. Because I was living on a pretty tight budget, I normally made a point of turning off all the lights when I left, but my boyfriend only lived about 5 minutes away, so I knew I'd be there and back very quickly. Sure enough, I got back less than 15 minutes later. I immediately sensed something was off, as I could see the lights were off through the blinds. I called my boyfriend and he drove over to meet me. We unlocked the door and went in. All the lights were off in my apartment. Thinking maybe I'd had a power outage, I flipped on the main light and it came on. My boyfriend checked the entire apartment. No one was inside, but someone had gone through and systematically turned off every light at their switch, including my lizard's basking light, the only light I always left on because it was on a timer, and my laptop, which I'd left open on my assignment, but now the computer had been powered down and closed. We called the emergency maintenance number, and I explained that someone had been inside my apartment and that they had to have used a key because there was no sign of forced entry. The manager called me back and told me I had to be imagining things maybe I had forgotten, then I had turned off the lights before I left. I assured him that I wouldn't have turned off the computer or the lizard light. Someone had been in my apartment. I told him I was extremely worried, because obviously this person had a key to get in. Either they worked for the complex, or maybe it was a previous tenant guest. I asked if they had changed the locks after the previous tenant moved out, and they assured me they'd changed the locks after every move out. The manager suggested maybe it was a friend pranking me, someone else I had given a key. The only other people I had given keys were my boyfriend. His key to my apartment had been locked inside his apartment on the same keyring as his own apartment key, and my mom, she lived 3 hours away. In any case, neither of them would have pranked me in this way. The manager finally agreed to send someone out immediately to change the lock for my peace of mind. I brought up my concern that it was someone on the staff since they would be the only other people with keys. The manager claimed the keys were locked in a special safe that required a personalized code to track who took what keys and when, in an office with a security camera. They changed my locks, but I had my doubts that it would do much good. As far as I was aware, there were only 2 maintenance men that worked at the complex, one nice older man that didn't seem all that skilled, and a younger guy with a scruffy beard that gave me a bad feeling. I suspected he had to be the one that had come in. When I had first moved in, the manager had told me I would be getting a new kitchen counter within the first 3 days. I waited to move in my kitchen stuff, but after a week they hadn't come, and then after a few months I had completely forgotten about it. One day I was sitting in my living room, and this scruffy maintenance guy walked in without knocking or announcing himself, and I hadn't received a notice to expect him. He said he was there to replace my countertop. It took him 2 days to install one small piece of counter. A few weeks later, I was getting out of the shower and heard a single knock at the door. I called out, "Just 1 minute," and hurried to get some clothes. Not 2 seconds later, the door started to open, and I had to slam it shut, still wrapped in a towel, to stop him from coming in. He claimed he hadn't heard me call out, but I had my doubts. I don't remember what made-up excuse he had for coming in. Another time I found a note from him that he had come in. Again, it didn't give a reason as to why, but that he'd made sure not to let my cats out. He also made a note about my third cat being cute, except I didn't have a third cat. I did, however, have a picture of my childhood cat in my bedroom on the IKEA shelf where I kept my clothes. At that point I went to the office to ask them to make a note in my file that I A. wanted at least 24 hours notice before entry going forward, and B. wanted to always be present for future entry. Now that I knew without a shadow of a doubt that someone was coming in secretly, it all made sense. It hadn't been long after the surprise maintenance visit stopped that things had started moving around in my apartment. He was also on site all the time. Everyone on staff also lived at Paradise, so he would know when I came and went. Who knew how many times he had snuck in? How many small souvenirs he has stolen? He could have been coming in while I was asleep. After the night with the lights, I put my own lock on the door, but still didn't totally trust the apartment. I ended up buying a condo shortly after, with help from my parents, subleased the apartment, and moved. Right around that time, I also got my first job working in a different apartment complex. In the final days before I left, my mom came into town to help me move my stuff. While she was home alone, I was at a class. She caught the scruffy maintenance man trying to get his key to work in my lock. She demanded to know what he was doing, and he said he was there to paint the front door. I hadn't received a notice, and he didn't have any painter supplies. She told him he could wait until after I had moved out. A few years later, I was shocked by the owner of Paradise Apartments while working at another complex in town, OK Apartments. Shopping is when an employee from one apartment complex takes a tour at another apartment complex, under the guise of wanting an apartment for the purpose of gaining information they might not otherwise easily give up. It can also be performed by your own management company to make sure you're doing a good job. There were certain tells a shopper always gave, like asking specifically worded questions: is this safe here? I'm a felon, can I live here? Etc. that require specifically worded answers and were easy to trip up on, being too wealthy for the complex, Rolex watch, sports car, nice suit, etc., and being too flexible on what they were interested in, i.e. they were interested in all the layouts, and were open to move in whenever. This guy seemed too old and too well off to be randomly considering an apartment at OK. We were geared towards lower income folks. While I was giving the tour, he asked if I had any opinions on other apartment complexes in town, and mentioned Paradise specifically. Normally I wouldn't badmouth any other complexes, I preferred to win them over by showing them the positives of our community, but I told him that I probably wasn't the best person to answer that question, because I was probably the only person to give Paradise a bad review in the last 5 years. He asked me to elaborate, and I told him my apartment had been broken into, and I suspected it was someone on their maintenance staff. At that point, he revealed that he was the owner of Paradise, and that he was very disturbed to hear I'd had this experience. He asked me to describe the maintenance man in detail. I assured him it was in the past and I was over it, but he insisted on calling the manager over at Paradise, still the same guy, to ask him over speakerphone if they had had any issues with the maintenance staff back in the year I had lived there. He answered yes, there had been a scruffy young maintenance man he'd had to fire, because he'd been caught multiple times breaking into the apartments of single women. Satisfied, the owner proudly told me the issue had been resolved and asked if I would be willing to change my review. I told him no, none of this had changed the fact I'd experienced this, and actually validated what I had suspected. In the years I worked as a leasing agent, I learned a lot about where complexes will cut corners to save time and money. From my experience, a lot of complexes did not switch out the locks if the tenant was good, and a lot did not require background checks for employees, even though they did require them for tenants. Keys also got passed out willy-nilly to vendors and maintenance during turns, and employees frequently got master keys that would open all doors. I wouldn't go so far as to say every complex operates this way, but every complex I worked at was doing this when I started there. Because of my own experiences, once I began managing a complex, I enforced strict rules about changing locks, tracking keys, posting proper notices, and requiring background checks for all employees and tenants. At least here in Florida, with ME's law going into effect this year, background checks for employees and security measures for keys are required for all complexes. Even still, if you're renting an apartment, stay diligent. If you have reason to believe someone is coming into your home, document it and let the staff, police, family, friends know. You never know who might have a key to your apartment. Number 3. My name is Oscar, I am 28, I live with my mum and brother. My brother, Billy, is 23, and what I am about to tell you still gets to me. It occurred 20 years ago and involves Billy and the basement of our previous house. One day, my mum randomly started to spend time in our basement when we got home after school. I never knew why. And to be honest, me and Billy didn't want to know. It was always dark, and in order to turn on the light, you would have to go down the dark steps to switch on the light, and we were not brave enough to do that, plus, we were always told not to go down there. One afternoon, during the weekend, my mum came out of the basement as the home phone was ringing, the basement's light was still on, and me and Billy looked at each other and grinned. You know what that means, when you are not supposed to do something and you and your close one look at each other, and the grin you both give is an agreement to do what is not supposed to be done. Me and Billy quietly went downstairs, and it was a complete mess. There were so many bin bags, all filled and tied up, and I was so confused. I decided to open one of the bags and could see a lot of rubbish, from card, paper, and a lot of dust. There was also a broom, which then made me realize that my mum must be cleaning out the basement, but why? I then noticed a box, and I was so eager to open it. I would have been eager now, to be honest, but before I decided to open it, I wanted Billy to be here with me, to get his attention and show him what his big brother had just found, and at his young age, I was sure he was going to be excited. But this is when it starts to get weird. As I had turned around trying to get his attention, Billy was faced towards one of the corners and just looking up. I started calling him, but not too loudly. I didn't want our mum to find out we were down here. I didn't get a response. He was still faced towards the corner and just looking up. I was a kid myself and was terrified with Billy's behavior. I so wanted to run up the stairs as Billy's was giving me the creeps. I managed to compose myself and slowly started to walk towards him. I was not too far behind him and I could hear him whispering. He was whispering to himself. I could not make out what Billy was saying. I ran up the stairs with tears of confusion in my eyes, into the bedroom. Before I could even scream to get my mum's attention, my heart sank. My mum was still on the phone, but Billy was also in the room, playing on his Game Boy. My mum got off the phone and asked what had happened. I was not focused on my mum or her questions. I was frozen, eyes fixed on Billy, thinking how on earth he was up here when he was just downstairs. My mum noticed I had been down the basement. She closed the door and told me not to go down there again. I had so much built up inside me. I wanted to cry. I wanted to shout and let my mum know what had just happened, but I kept it in, and we just continued with our day. It was now 2 a.m. Everyone was in their room, fast asleep, but I just couldn't. All I kept thinking about, how Billy was in 2 places at once. I also wanted to know what was inside the box, and being a young boy who didn't know better, I decided to go down there and check. I slowly went down the stairs. Everything looked okay, apart from the mess. I went over to the box and opened it. It was filled with cut-up card and paper. I realized my mum made a birthday banner from it as it spelled, "Happy Birthday Billy." The box and the bin bag started to make sense, and why my mum was spending time down the basement during the last few weeks. She was clearing the basement, so she could host a birthday party for Billy. It made sense to me. The basement is quite spacious, and seemed like a good place for a family party, I told myself. I was still confused on how Billy was in 2 places at once, but I don't know, was I just seeing things, I told myself. I put the lid back on top of the box, took a big deep breath, and was ready to go back upstairs into my room. As I turned around, my brother, Billy, was in front of me. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Mum is going to kill us if she finds us down here." I didn't get a response. Billy was just staring at me. I then started to think about what happened before, how Billy was in 2 places at once. I must be turning mad. I must be seeing things, I told myself. "We're going upstairs right now. There's nothing down here," I said. I was ready to take his hand and go upstairs, but I couldn't feel him. I couldn't feel Billy's hand. The lights then started flickering. It kept on going on and off every 2 seconds. And every time they would turn on, the smile on Billy's face kept getting whiter and creepier. I ran so fast up the stairs, and before I could open the door, I hear, "Billy, I want Billy." I turn back and see something I can't describe, even until this day. It was a dark figure, like the Dark Riders from Lord of the Rings. They were just standing at the bottom of the stairs holding Billy. I froze. This thing then started to run up the stairs, towards me. I closed my eyes and started screaming and hoping that this was just a bad dream. "Oscar, what the hell are you doing here? How many times have I told you that you shouldn't be here?" It was my mum's voice. I opened my eyes, turned around and see my mum, looking like she was about to turn into She-Hulk, whilst holding Billy, who is crying. I turned back and there was nothing there. I was speechless and motionless, and whilst being in this state, my mum took my hand, took me into my room and told me to go to sleep. Fast forward 2 weeks, nothing weird has happened, and today is Billy's birthday. The day was going so great. It was just me, Billy and my mum, playing in the garden, playing board games and opening up presents. Billy was so happy to see that he got the new Pokemon game for his Game Boy, and gave my mum a big hug. He then looked at me, ran towards me and hugged me. Whilst we were hugging, he whispered, "Thank you, Oscar," and before I could say, "It's okay, anything for my baby brother," he says, "I want Billy," in that old, evil voice I heard 2 weeks ago. I pushed him away, forcefully, without thinking, and Billy falls over and starts crying. "What is wrong with you? Have been so weird lately, and you are ruining Billy's big day. Sort yourself out, as we have guests over this evening, and it will be in the basement," my mum shouted. The basement, Mum? Do we have to go down into the basement?" I asked nervously. "Yes, now listen, Billy and Oscar. I have been in the basement after school for the last few weeks, as I have been planning to have a family gathering down there and have cake for Billy's birthday. So this evening, your uncle, auntie and cousins are coming, and we will be spending time down in the basement." After hearing this, Billy starts jumping up and down, in excitement, whilst I start dreading the idea. It's 8 p.m. and the doorbell rings. It's my family. They came and we all greeted. They all gave Billy presents and wished him a happy birthday. My uncle then looked at me and said, "Hey Oscar, you look like you've seen a monster. Are you okay?" No, I'm just tired as I didn't sleep well last night because of the excitement for Billy's birthday," I said, but wanting to say, yes, I have, and I don't want to go down the basement." My mum was catching up with her brother and sister-in-law, whilst me, Billy and 2 of my cousins were in my room, playing the new Pokemon game on Billy's Game Boy. We were having a great time, trying to catch this stubborn Pikachu, who didn't want to go into the Pokeball, until my mum opened my door and told us all to come down into the basement to have cake and take pictures. Billy and my 2 cousins jumped up and down in excitement and ran out of room, whilst I was walking, slowly and terrified, thinking the worst. We were all now in the basement. There was a table with a cake and a chair, set for Billy. Billy sat on the chair, and we all stood in front of him, singing happy birthday. Whilst we were all singing and having a great time, I see something coming up behind Billy, like how a person slowly gets up from the sitting on the floor. I noticed this thing looked exactly like the dark figure I saw before. This thing looked like it was about to grab Billy, until I closed my eyes and shouted, "Leave my brother alone." I opened my eyes and Billy is just starting at me and there was nothing behind him. I look around and my family are all quiet, shocked, confused, and worried. I then collapse onto the floor and end up waking up hours later. My family had left, and my mom and Billy were in the other room, sleeping. 20 years later and nothing weird has happened since. Me and Billy have grown up, and we, along with my mom, have moved into a bigger house as Billy needed his own room. Everything has been okay since I woke up in my room all those years ago. I don't understand what I saw, I don't understand what I heard, and I don't understand what I experienced, but I am so glad it's over. I wanted to share this with you all to let it off my chest. We hope you found these stories both thrilling and thought-provoking. Delving into the darkest parts of the human psyche can be a scary and unsettling experience, but it's also an important one. By exploring our deepest fears and desires, we can gain a better understanding of ourselves and the world around us. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel for more spine-tingling content. And always remember to keep the lights on.